So here we go, the third topic of today, hardware-enabled services in the overall context of smart living. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker, Mr. Chee Kiang Lim, Principal of Galphone Advisory Company Limited. Welcome. Welcome, Mr. Lim.
Thank you very much. Hi, thanks for spending time here to hear me share some insights on this topic. Now, given that this is a largely electronics and hardware show, I thought I should share with you some perspective based on the work that I've done in China, especially on how do you differentiate yourself as a hardware player. So hence my topic today, hardware-enabled services in the overall context of smart living. So let me just quickly show you the first picture, right? For those of you who've been to China, this is not new. But for those of you who haven't been to China in the last 6 months, I need some explanation. So, I titled this, Who's Disrupting Who, right? It's interesting, if you look at that, 20 years ago, if you walk the streets of Beijing, Shanghai, you see lots of bikes. You see very few cars, right? In the last 10 years or so, cars have taken over the roads of China. But this picture is showing, the reverse. The bikes are kind of claiming back the space. So who is disrupting who, right? Well, we're talking about two different types of hardware, right? The car is obviously automotive is a hardware that's been around for about 100 years, popularized by Henry Ford. And in fact, the car of today is very different from the car of Henry Ford in terms of, I've read a report that to say that a car actually has about 100 million lines of code compared to, say, a Boeing 787. I think that's about 45 million lines of code. Or your Microsoft Windows, that's about maybe 30 million lines of code. So the point here is the car is no longer a hardware. The car is actually hardware plus software because, in the car you want to be able to know the performance of your brakes, your temperature, your engine, and so on. And in the case of a bike, right? Bike has been around for ages. But why is this thing disrupting mobility in China? Well, they have installed a lock. And the lock is a connected lock enabled by Bluetooth with GPS and maybe Wi-Fi. And this allows you to do bike sharing without being tethered to a docking station. So this is free flow ride sharing. And I'll talk a bit more, okay? So a little bit about China. I think this is not new. You guys would have seen this. China is really, in terms of the digital landscape, the numbers are mind-boggling, right? If you look at the number of internet users, we have about 730 million. If you look at the number of WeChat users, 846 million. The actual numbers is more like 895 based on the most recent report I read this morning. The numbers are growing like 20, 30 million every half a year or so. Right? So in fact, you have more WeChat users than the internet users. This can be explained by a couple of things. Some Chinese people have more than one WeChat account, or you have some foreigners within the WeChat users group as well. Another numbers to look at is actually here. The number of top Chinese companies that are among the top tech companies worldwide. China has 4 of them, right? Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Huawei. So you think about it, they are in the class of the likes of Facebook, Amazon, Google. So Chinese companies are coming up. They're really punching above their weight in the international scene. Another thing to look at, daily choosing, for those of you who may not know, is the Uber of China. And in fact, they out-Uber in China, right? Last year, they bought over Uber's operation in China. So effectively, they merged. They have 20 million rides in China, right? Uber is probably less than that globally. So Uber's operation around the world combined is probably less than this number. I don't have the number, but it's a hypothesis. Singles Day was invented by Alibaba. That's on 11th of November. And in Singles Day last year, $17.8 billion worth of transaction. Amazon's Black Friday, in comparison, was a fraction of that, right? So numbers in China are big, and these are digital numbers. So let me show you some other information, and I'm not going to go through this in detail. But when it comes to matrices related to digital adoption in China, numbers are growing really, really big and really fast, right? The benefit about China is, unlike the Western world that many of us come from. I live in the US for 10 years. You have a more gradual adoption of technology. Let's take internet adoption. You started off with PC, right? And then you go to mobile phone, maybe tablet. But in China, in the rural area, they don't even have PC to start off with. So when 3G, 4G will roll out in the rural area, they get directly into the internet for the first time using their big screen mobile phone. So that you even have grandparents in a park watching the latest Chinese soap opera using their big screen tablet. So the thing about China is, because of the lack of this legacy, the appetite for adopting technology is a lot more open than compared to many other countries in the world. So internet actually has, digitization internet, especially mobile internet, has penetrated almost every aspect of our lives. So a quick example, right? So each one of this internet plus something actually creates new business model. And this is, again, very China context. So internet plus communication, we have WeChat. But actually, it disrupts things like the traditional form of messaging, right, which is SMS. Internet plus retail, you have Taobao, Tmall. And what does it disrupt? It disrupts your traditional shopping mall. If you go to the shopping malls in China, they are pretty much empty because nobody buys physical goods in a physical store anymore, right? Internet plus automotive, you have Didi or you have Uber. Who they disrupt? Well, potentially they're going to disrupt your traditional automotive players, like your Ford of the world, your Daimler of the world. Internet plus entertainment, you have Le Eco, which is like the Netflix of China. And they are disrupting traditional TV China, like CCTV, for example. Internet plus finance, you have Ant Financial, which is the dominant player for Alipay, dominant online digital payment provider in China. And they're disrupting the likes of UnionPay, banks, and so on. Now, let's continue, right? Now, the underlying message here is this: with the mobile internet connectivity, devices that were traditionally dumb devices are increasingly become smart. So, I've read a report about a company adding connectivity to chopsticks. So they call it smart chopsticks. You add one to a fork, smart forks, smart comb. I mean, the list is mind-boggling. Some of these will succeed, some of these will fail. So for those of us who are in the hardware business, it's very easy to say, let me add a connectivity to it, we make it smart, right? So you add connectivity to an oven, you have a smart oven. Traditional glasses, it becomes a smart glasses. And blood pressure monitor, you have a smart blood pressure monitor, right? But the message I want to really, the key thesis of this talk is connectivity and hardware alone is not sufficient to be a viable and competitive and sustainable business model. What do we really need, actually? And let's pause from the message from there. So the thing is, once you have a connected hardware device, what are you enabling? You're actually enabling a whole slew of services, especially within a ecosystem that is not possible just with the hardware. Some examples that we have given here, right? So the point here I want to make, and I will make that point again, is it's all about the utility derived from the hardware connected to with connectivity. So connected hardware actually allows you to provide services and value propositions that becomes a lot more attractive as a business model value proposition. This is a little complicated, but let me explain it very quickly. Now, on the left, the traditional hardware value chain looks like this, right? You have R&D, you have procurement, and then you go to production, and then you do sales. Very straightforward. And oftentimes, for most of these hardware players we see in this exhibition hall, their focus is probably on the R&D and product design, because the production is usually outsourced to the likes of a Foxconn, And of course, they will also focus on branding, sales, and services. But in the what we call the C2B business model, the customer-centric business model, it's all about creating a whole ecosystem, right? Where at every stage of the value chain, you are involving the user feedback. So I have given you some examples here, right? I think a very good example will be Xiaomi. Xiaomi has actually a group of people, I think the numbers are in the tens of millions, who constantly provide feedback on their product so that Xiaomi is able to roll out software update kind of on a weekly basis, taking into their feedback, right? And you're going to see more of that. So a hardware product would necessarily become obsolete, especially in IT products in maybe a year or two. But a hardware product that is enabled by software enable you to actually use the software to do an update and refresh the product, right, without changing the hardware. So by soliciting feedback from your user base, they are actually helping you co-create and co-design and co-develop your next generation of product. So I'm going to show you a couple of ecosystems that we have, right? I mean, in terms of China, it is already becoming, a world-leading focal point when it comes to business model innovation, especially in the mobile internet space. Many of these companies we see here are from China, many of them from Shenzhen, right? Some examples I've shown here. I wouldn't go very much into it. I've talked about WeChat, WePay, I've talked about Alipay, and so on. Maybe I share with you an anecdote, right? When I was in China about 10 years ago, I was traveling from Chengdu to Xi'an. I wanted to see the terracotta soldier. Because I didn't book the trip in advance, I couldn't. There was no China or C-trip. So I had to physically call up the travel agency. A gentleman bring the tickets, paper ticket to my hotel room. I had to pay him in a whole stack of 100 renminbi notes. And that was 10 years ago, right? The world of today, I can, right now as I speak, I can, book a ticket in China, pay with my Alipay, and my e-ticket is done within a matter of minutes. And this is where China this is kind of the speed that innovation has come along in China. And some of these are actually enabled by underlying technology and services found here. So DT, the company that I spoke about, started off as a taxi matching service. This is 2012. So they are a 5-year-old company. Now they are worth something like 20 to $30 billion market cap. Well, since that start, they have actually expanded around their services to all these things, which covers the whole end-to-end mobility value chain, right? And the biggest business they are in right now is actually, limousine booking. So they are matching private car drivers with passengers who need mobility. So it's very much like Uber. But they've gone further than that. They've gone into aggregating mobility to provide on-demand buses. They're going into autonomous driving and other things, right? Mobike, which I started off talking earlier in my presentation. Mobike started off as an experiment in Beijing University, right, by a student there. As you know, Beijing University campus is huge, and getting people to go around is always a problem. If you buy a bike, it might be stolen. So she created a Mobike service to do that. It was so successful that she decided to roll it out outside of the campus into Beijing, Shanghai, and now in a number of cities. In fact, 23 cities have been launched in the last 10 months. And they have done really, really well. In fact, they're expanding to overseas country like Singapore. I think they were in Singapore as of 2 weeks ago. So that's my home country. So, the ability to combine hardware with some software and connectivity, but the key thing is you should be thinking about services, right? What Mobike addresses is actually the pain point of the first last mile transportation. That's why it's become so popular, right? It's a cheap way of, for most commuters in China, that last mile is very bad. If you want to walk, the pavements are uneven, or in the hot summer or the cold winter. If you want to hail a taxi for that short distance, they typically don't want to, they refuse to give you the ride. So this allows you to kind of make this journey in a lot cheaper and faster way. Well, this example, I think we all know about the Apple ecosystem. Why is Apple cornering something like 70 to 80% of the global profit pool for smartphone? It's not because, it's partly because they have really good hardware, well-designed hardware, but it's also because Apple created a whole ecosystem that if you own an iPhone, you're very likely to own an iPad, maybe an iMac. And the services generated from that, iTunes and so on, locks you into the ecosystem. That's why, the hardware, they are able to sell that at such a price premium that a Samsung or other phone players are not able to do so, right? So it's about software, it's providing services, right? Nike is an example, right? So Nike, you think about it, they are a sneaker company. Well, they used to be. But what they've been doing is they've been embedding a lot of sensors and software. So, within the shoes, it actually measures your heartbeat, it measures the forces and your gait as you go running. Even apparel, they built in sensors to measure your perspiration, your heart rate, and so on. So what it enables is Nike is no longer a hardware company, you want to think about it. They're trying to transform themselves into a athlete or sports services related company, right? And why is this important? I'll come to the main point in a while, right? Which is this is my final slide. So back to what I've mentioned just now. If in the traditional hardware model, your profit margin is typically, you make a device at cost X. You sell it through your distributor to the end user at X plus a margin, right? So you get the margin as a hardware manufacturer. Maybe you get some additional margin from selling spare parts and services, aftermarket services, but that's it. And people typically buy a hardware, depending on the lifespan of the hardware. Maybe for a car, it could be 5 to 7 years. For iPhone, it could be 1 year. They buy it once every X number of years, right? So you get a sort of revenue once every 2 years, once every 5 years. But for services, so services enabled by hardware, let's take mobility services, right? You need a ride all the time. You buy a car once every 5 to 7 years. You need a ride a few times a day. So this is a constant high touch point, frequent. You might be getting revenue that are a lot smaller, but you get that sort of revenue many times a day, every day, pretty much. So this is a lot more stable and consistent revenue stream. So my message to folks in the audience is this: if you are in a business of a hardware manufacturer, think about how can you use that hardware or design the hardware to enable services, right? To solve a pain point where your customer or your potential customer is willing to pay to solve that pain point. And I think what you will have is a lot more sustainable and, frankly speaking, more lucrative business model. And a couple of questions that I've kind of listed here is to guide you, right? If you want to transform yourself from a hardware player to more of a software-enabled services player, these are maybe some of the questions that you should use to think about how to do so, right? A lot of this, it's no rocket science. In the case of hardware, you're always designing to what the user want or might need in the future. But for services, it's different because there's always, what you're doing is actually solving a pain point. So the question is always, is there a market opportunity? Is there a pain point that exists in the market that nobody has come up with a solution to solve it? And if so, then what sort of value proposition can you offer with a service, right? If you add connectivity to a traditional piece of dumb hardware, what additional utility can you derive from that? And how do I monetize that, right? And lastly, I think the question is, for a product-centric business, the question you ask is, how can I find a more lucrative and sustainable business that is beyond cost plus, right? Cost plus is essentially what I mentioned, the margin you derive from that. Now, for software is really about enabling the hardware and enabling additional customization to the hardware and, building a better user experience. So the question is, how do you use your software to make your hardware better, right? But I think the million-dollar question is the services part. Now, as you examine the pain points and as you develop services with your hardware, I think the larger question you want to ask yourself is, what are some of the digital ecosystem that you can build, right? So let's take the example of a simple one. Let's say, my example I gave you, smart microwave oven. So perhaps you can offer, because of a smart connectivity, you can offer, the microwave oven can actually download the latest menu to cooking your turkey, for example, right, on the web. You like that, the cooking, and then, somebody uploaded that and they can do it. Well, that is a services, but how do you expand that to maybe creating a cooking ecosystem? So with a hardware, with your fridge, in a way the fridge knows that you're going to be cooking turkey, so the fridge will kind of defrost the turkey, and 10 hours before you're cooking it. So when it's ready, you take it out from the fridge, you throw it in the microwave, it cooks it for you using a menu that you download on the internet, right? And connect with other devices. So then you form an ecosystem, and then you can even form a community of, maybe hobbies, chef at home who want to share menus, who want to find the latest kind of products and so on. I mean, that's one example, right? So the idea here is hardware creates services, and the next step is how do you use the services to conjure up a ecosystem, okay? So that's really the thesis of my sharing today. And the concluding slide is, smart living, the theme of this afternoon session, is actually there are abundant opportunities available in smart living. And if you look at the graph here, it's a typical schedule of somebody, in a day, right? You're sleeping, you wake up, have breakfast, commute, work, lunch, work, travel, dinner, shopping, whatever. This is a weekday schedule. If you think about smart living, each one of a person's schedule, there are pain points that to be solved, right? I mean, commuting, there's a mobility pain points. Sleeping, well, there could be pain points related to quality of sleep and so on. So the point here is, if you think about a person's daily touch point or pain points that they have, and if you can find a way of using your hardware to address these pain points with services, there's money to be made. There's a lot of money to be made. And if you can do it across the whole routine of a typical person, then you are creating an ecosystem. Then there's even more money that you can make, right? So that's it. And just for those of you who want to keep in touch, that's my email address. If you have WeChat, you can scan me and add me if you want to talk more. And just a little bit about Gaofeng Advisory Company. So we are a China-centric consulting firm. We are present in these 3 offices in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Beijing. And we typically help large companies with their strategy related to digital ecosystem and digital disruption. Right? So if you want to kind of find out more about our company, feel free to check out our website here. And or you can add me and come talk to me at the end of this talk.
Thank you.